Welcome to the first in a two-part series on the Science Assessment Manager section of Discovery Education Science Techbook. In this section, we're going to be talking about how to create an assessment and assign it to our students. The Science Assessment Manager can be found by going to the My Builder Tool section and clicking on Science Assessment Manager. Once you're in, you'll see that you can either create, assign or print, or report or recommend. You also have access to all of your previously created assessments down below. For this section, again, we're going to be talking about creating an assessment. You can create a standards-based assessment, a concept-based assessment, or a custom assessment. For today's purposes, we're going to create a concept-based assessment. When I click on Create a Concept-Based Assessment, the first thing it's going to ask me to do is put in a title for my assessment. So we're going to put in Force and Motion. I need to choose a grade, so I'm in the state of Florida's Techbook, so I'm going to go to Florida Grade 5. And then I can provide some instructions, objectives, or notes, and in this case I'm just going to add in some basic additional instructions that's going to ask the students to pay close attention to each answer choice. Once I've added in any material I want to add, I can click Finish Editing. And that'll add it into the instruction section. I can do the same thing with objectives and notes. I'm going to go on into Save and Continue. And it's going to ask me where I want to save this. Now, it's going to save it into my content, and I can either add a folder to put this in, or if I already have a folder like I do in this case, I can add it into that folder for that concept or unit that I'm studying. So I'm going to add it into my folder for Force and Motion. Once I've added in a folder, I have to go and find the resources that I want to use. You'll notice I have my categories up here: Earth and Space Science, Life Science, and Physical Science. Force and Motion is a physical science skill, so I'm going to go into Physical Science. And then you'll see I have my units: Electricity, Force and Motion, and mixing it up. So I'm going to go into the unit Force and Motion. Now you'll notice that I have three concepts within that unit: about force, changing the speed of motion, and changing direction. I'm going to create a unit assessment, so I'm going to use multiple concepts. Now, beside each concept, you'll notice I have the number of items listed, and that tells me how many questions we have in our data bank for that concept. I can preview the items if I need to look up ahead of time, making sure that they're going to fit into what I'm trying to assess my students on. But for right now, I'm just going to click Save and Continue. This is where you'll see all the questions that relate to each individual concept you've chosen. So in this case, we're in the concept of changing direction. And you'll notice that my first question is here, and you'll notice this little red area here, set of words. This is a student self-assessment question. If you go into our unit concepts, you'll see that we have assessments already built, and this just lets you know that this question is in that previously built assessment, the self-assessments we call them. So I can either use those or not use them, but we want to make sure you're aware that those are part of those self-assessments. If I want to use questions that are not part of the self-assessment, I just look for areas where that is not highlighted, and I'll find a few down here. And I'll choose a couple of the ones that are not part of that self-assessment for this individual concept of changing direction. So I'll choose a couple for changing direction. And then right here, if I scroll back up, I can click on the little arrow next to changing direction, the concept, and I can minimize it. That'll bring up the next concept about force. And I can choose, again, some questions from that. Again, same the information applies. If I'm looking for questions that are not part of the self-assessment, make sure I choose the ones without the red content. So I'll choose a couple from here. And again, I'll scroll back up and click on the arrow to minimize that. Now I've got my final concept, changing the speed of motion. Again, I'll choose a couple questions from here. And then I'll go back up and minimize that concept to make sure I've got all my concepts chosen. Now I click Save and Continue to move to the next step. This next step shows me all the questions that I've chosen. And this is where I can actually drag and drop and put these questions in the order I want to have the students take them in. Now if I do that option, every single student will get the same questions in the same order. But I also can have the students get the same questions in random order by checking this box up here. And I'm going to choose that option for right now. I'm going to click Save and Continue. This next is where I can assign my assessment. Now, I have a start date and I have a due date right off the bat. So maybe I want to have this assessment start today, or maybe I want to actually have it start next Monday. So I'm going to choose next Monday for my assessment start date. And for my due date, I want to have it completed by the end of that week. So I'm going to go into March 18th. It's my due date. I can have it as far out as I want. And the start date will just let me know when it'll be visible for my students. Next Monday means that my students will not see it until the following Monday in their assignments. I can preview the assessment if I would like by clicking here if I want to see what it looks like ahead of time. This will show me a preview of the assessment. I can print a student assessment if I want my students to take it in paper and pencil version, or print a teacher answer key if I need to do that. From here, I can either create a class, but we'll show about talking about creating a class in another tutorial, or I can assign the assessment I've already created to a classroom that already exists. In this case, I can assign it to the FLK5 classroom, or I can assign it to individual students. Either way will work just fine, so again, either assign it to your entire class or to individual students. Once I've done that, I click Save and Continue. And I can either assign it again, or I can return it to Builder Tools and create another assessment for another group of students if I would like. In our next tutorial, we're going to be talking about how to look at the data that is generated from students' assessments. Welcome to part 2 of the tutorial for the Science Assessment Manager for the Discovery Education Science Textbook. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at recommendations and reports generated from student assessments that we created using the Science Assessment Manager. The Science Assessment Manager can be accessed by going on to the My Builder Tools section of the Science Textbook. You can access this Science Assessment Manager by clicking on Science Assessment Manager. And this will take you where you can again create, assign or print, or report or recommend. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the reports or recommendations based on results from student assessments. You can view results by student or by class. In this case, we're going to look at results by class. First thing I'll need to do is select a class. So we're going to go to the FLK5 classroom. And we're going to choose an assessment. The assessment we're going to choose is the one we previously created in our earlier tutorial. Force in motion. When I click View, I'm going to see all of my students and their scores for every attempt that they've had on this assessment. In this case, they've only had one attempt. And I'll see a variety of scores. If I want to look at an individual student's score, I can click on that student's score. So in this case, let's look at David Carlin. And this will pull up David's assessment. I can look at how he did by concept, and I can look at individual results for David for each individual question. If I click on Review Results, this will show me all the information for his test, including the questions he got correct and incorrect, and the answers he chose if he got it incorrect. I also can look at recommendations. These are materials recommended for David to review based on the questions he missed. I'll see a variety of resources, virtual labs, explorations, reading passages, and video segments to help David out. And based on what I know about David, I would assign the appropriate material for the individual questions that he missed. I can check the box of the ones I want to assign, and then click Assign. Going back to the full class view, I also can look at reports for the entire class. So I click on View Reports. I'll see first an item report. So this will show every question answered by my class by concept. So in this case, I'm in the concept about force, and I see every question that was answered for my class dealing with about force. And I'll see right away that I have a couple questions where my students had difficulty. The second question listed shows 30% of my class got it correct. All 10 of my students took that test question. 3 of them got it correct, and 7 of them chose the incorrect answer, B. So that lets me know that's the distractor that threw off my students from the correct answer. So it'll help me when I want to reteach that skill to better emphasize the differences between those answers for my students. And I can do that for every individual question as I scroll down through the list. I also can look at it from a student score perspective, or this will kind of show by concept. So I can look at each individual concept and see how my class did. In this case, you'll notice about force is probably an area that I need to reteach to my entire class. Where changing the speed of motion is an area that my students seem to grasp pretty well. I just have a couple students I need to do some remedial work with. All the data from our assessment manager can be exported to Excel and then added into gradebooks as you see fit. That concludes our tutorial for the Science Assessment Manager, reports and recommendations. In our next tutorial, we'll be talking about how to create classrooms using the Classroom Manager.